Hi, Dr. Malak.
How are you?
I'm okay, thanks. How are you?
I'm good. I'm quite good.
Excellent.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, bless you. Thank you for being here. Are you able to tell us a little bit about yourself before presenting?
Well, yeah, I've been in healthcare management for the last 17 years. I've been in different roles in hospitals mainly, and I've worked mostly in Lebanon and some Middle Eastern countries. And I've been into different studying different kind of things like operations and simulations and roles of different healthcare workers, and but today I'm going to talk about something a little bit different. It's more conceptual for the healthcare model.
Excellent. I look forward to hearing your presentation. The
Okay,
stage is yours.
I'm gonna try to share my PowerPoint. Just give me a few seconds.
I can see the PowerPoint.
Okay, I think it was shared on your half.
Yes. Yes.
All right. That's quite perfect.
Excellent. Well, the stage is yours, Dr. Malak.
Okay. Thank you for organizing this conference, and thank you for everyone tuning in. I really appreciate your time. I know how much of a hassle to watch a webinar online, and thank you for the organizers who made it easy for us and made this conference such a successful one. My talk for today is a case for the future of the hospital, rethinking of the healthcare roles from first principle thinking perspective. I'm going to start out by showing some pictures and then talking about a story behind this picture. Next, please. This photo is a photo of the first computer in the early 1950s that's assembled by the famous IBM computer company and by collaboration with Harvard University. This machine was the start of the discipline of computer science, and it was kind of a massive machine. It's 50 feet long, 8 feet high. It consisted of different interlocking panel of small gears, counters, switches, control circuits. It also had like 800 kilometers of wire, and it constituted of about 35,000 counters, 10-pole switches, and tires. So this machine was the start of the discipline of computer science. Next slide, please. And actually, the company at that time had 1,000 pages manuals about how to operate such a machine, the logistic of moving it around, how each person had a role in functioning the machine, of supplying the necessary gears, interlocking tunnels, vacuum tubes to make it work. They even had a plan and policies inside about how to give access and restrictions to each part of the machine and how to coordinate everybody's work together. They even had plans how to supply the metal and the gears that are necessary to operate and the wires that are necessary to operate such a machine. And that's how computer science started, with this massive equipment. And these roles that I've mentioned could have been grown and become established roles and with a certain education. But something different happened. Something called Moore's Law. a person called Gordon Moore had a theory, or it's more of a prediction, that the number of transistors in a dense integrated circuit, which basically is a chip, the electric chip, will double every 2 years. And this kind of thinking made people in this sector think about computer science quite differently. What Gordon Moore did is shifted the thinking into the basic part of the computer, which is the chip, the electronic chip, and made everybody think about how we're gonna make it better and how to be the first to double it every 2 years. And that shifted the whole computer science pathway from a great big room, 20 feet long machine into empowering these little chips. And after the famous IBM photo I just showed, the machine, the Mark I, two guys, next slide, please, that you're quite familiar with, came into computer science, Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. And these people, they were pioneers and visionaries, and they were the first to lead computer science into getting this chip, making it more powerful. And the competition between them made even the science advance even faster. And they started thinking about the basic component of the computer, which is a chip, how to double it, how to make computers more powerful, how to give us personal computers to enter each and everybody's home. They started working on the design. They started working on their practicality. And they started removing unnecessary parts because they wanted to make it more compact and more easy to use. And they started making it user-friendly, multi-windows, and software that's easy to be understood by everyone who's using this. And then something else happened, which is the internet. And they took advantage of this. And they started combining communication with computing. And now everybody is using a computer right now, either for listening or presenting a lecture in this webinar, or the smartphones in our hands. Basically, we cannot live without them. Next photo, please. This is the photo of the steam engine car, one of the first cars that is, or a horseless carriage. It was the beginning of automobile manufacturing. And if you can see this photo, it has three guys. One of them, the one with the fancy hat and the bow tie, is the man who owns this car. And the two other guys are the ones who are operating it. The one in the front, let's call him the steerer. He steers the machine left and right. I think it only goes forward, doesn't go reverse at that time. And the other guy at the back is the guy responsible to put the coal inside the steam engine. And this is an external combustion engine. It needs coal. He needs to keep enough coal inside of the machine, the engine, and he needs to keep it ignited and make sure he always is there and watching these coals. And let's call this guy the coal steerer, if you want. And that's what happened. That's how car manufacturing started, from a horse-led carriage to a horse-free, self-operated car. And those two roles could have the steerer, and the coal dispenser could have evolved and could have their own functions and could have their own unions and syndicates even, but something different happened as well. Pioneers came into this, into car manufacturing. We remember Mr. Benz of Mercedes-Benz, and I want to quote Mr. Henry Ford. Please, the next slide. Next slide, please. And in his autobiography, he says this famous sentence. He says, as we cut out useless parts and simplify necessary ones, we also cut down the cost of making. It's a simple sentence, but it has a lot of important factors inside of it. And I want to stress on the word simplify necessary ones, simplify the necessary parts of the car. And in claiming that, Mr. Henry Ford, what he did is he asked everybody in the car manufacturing to focus on the basic parts of the cars. And the basic cars at that time was the engine. Wheels are important, lights are important, brakes are important, definitely, but the main powering, the main innovation that came with a car is the engine that would provide the power that used to be provided by horses or other animals at that time. And this focus, starting with Henry Ford and the European manufacturing and later the Japanese companies, they started thinking about the engine, and the engine started moving from being a steam engine to be a diesel engine, then a gasoline engine. And then they started making more efficient gasoline for those engines. And the engine itself started going from a 1-cylinder piston engine to 2-cylinder, 4, 6, and 8. And even we have 16 now and 32 cylinder engines. And the car became more powerful and faster and more convenient to be used instead of the horse-led carriages. And then I'm going to focus on another part of this sentence. As we cut out useless parts, cutting out useless parts, and that's as much as important as simplifying the necessary ones. Let's remove the extra metal that we don't need. Let's try to find metal that weighs less. Let's remove any furniture that's not very convenient and that just makes our the car more clumsy. And this process started improving until Henry Ford created what we famously know him for, the assembly line. Mass manufacturing of cars and bringing the car, the luxury of a car, to millions and millions of people. Now, most of us can picture our lives without one. And this was the important part or the milestone which made car manufacturing a smooth, lean industry. Next slide, please. This slide is a space rocket shooting up into space. And I want to go to the next photo as well. Please, next slide. And the electric cars. And this is a picture of an EV1 electric car, one of the first few electric cars. It was produced by General Motors. And those who are familiar, when they see those two photos, one person comes to their mind. Next slide, please. And that's this guy, Elon Musk. And you have to know, actually, Elon Musk was the one who coined the term in the modern era of first principle thinking. And when they asked him how you solve the problem of electric cars and space discovery, he said that my answer is by adopting first principle thinking. And I'll explain first principle thinking in just a few moments. Thank you for bearing with me that much without talking about first principle thinking or healthcare, but I will be there in a moment. So you have to know that space discovery had this big boom in the 1960s when they put a guy on the moon, and everybody knows about that. And then kind of the hype just died down. And yes, there were some improvements, and yes, there were millions and billions of dollars that went into space exploration, but nothing major happened. And that's what Elon Musk was questioning for some time, and he wanted to break the mold of space discovery, and he had the passion for it. And the same thing with electric cars. Electric cars had started out with the EV1, the picture I just showed you, and it just got stopped for like 20 to 30 years without any mention of electric cars anymore. And the ones that were brought to the market were inefficient, were slow, and were not that powerful. And actually what Elon Musk said he did to solve these problems is he used first principle thinking. And what he did is he broke up the problem into basic parts and then took the basic parts and re-engineered the manufacturing of rockets and electric cars. And here I want to, let me see if okay, next slide, please. Okay, so are we asking healthcare to borrow from other disciplines? I did show this photos and mention these stories of other disciplines and industries for a certain benefit for healthcare. And we have to know that healthcare had always borrowed from other disciplines. We had taken the Six Sigma from a communication company, from Motorola, the PDCA, that a lot of quality efforts depend on it, and the lean management came from Toyota, a car manufacturing company. The checklists we have for patient safety, the timeouts, and for the operations, and in many patient safety models, we got it from airplanes and the airline industry, where safety was a very important component of not having any failure in airplane flying. So we always took and borrowed successfully other things from other disciplines. But what we did is we have borrowed the tools. And what I'm asking, next slide, please. Next slide, thank you. I'm asking to borrow the thinking. Next slide as again, please. And here the thinking is first principle thinking. And I'm gonna explain it by having this pyramid-based 3-layer thinking. It starts with the base of the pyramid. It's the identification part. And here we ask ourselves, what is true about any industry? What is the reason for this industry? What are the problem we are solving? What is the hurtful thing we are trying to mend? And what are the assumptions? And you have to know that when a science or any discipline stays for quite a while, many of the assumptions become truths. And some of the real truths become forgotten. And what the basic function, the first stage of first principle thinking should be identifying the truths about the discipline of healthcare. What is true? What is the reality? What is the reason? What is the mission of healthcare? And what are the assumptions we had? Second stage is the breakdown. We break whatever we have into smaller parts in order we make the truths into units that are manageable, and then we are ready for the third stage and the final stage, which are presenting the solution and reassembling everything based on effectiveness. So it's identification, knowing what's true, breaking putting all the information, getting all the data, and putting them into small structures, and then reassembling and re-engineering any discipline into an effective one. And actually, although Elon Musk is the one who coined it in modern history, this kind of thinking started long, long ago. It started with the birth of logic and science. Next slide, please. Aristotle, those who know him, the famous philosopher from 350 BC and more, he's mentioned as the first one who mentioned first principle thinking. And you have to know that at that time, philosophers were not just people who profess about things and theorize. They were the closest things to scientists. They were the people who were asking the wondrous questions and trying to find logical solution. And the most important achievement they did was creating logic and putting the standards for it. And from that came science and the scientific method. And Aristotle himself was interested and had his studies in anatomy and biology, in physics and in math. So he was the first one who used the first principle thinking to solve the problems he faced in any of those disciplines. And then Descartes quite clearly described it, that you have to deduce everything to its basic parts until it's no more deducible. And then physics took over and started thinking about matter, and we started having technology that even Stephen Hawking quite famously said that philosophy is dead and science now have found out all the answers out there. And math and physics wanted to know what's the basic part of a matter. And then they found out that there's an atom and all matters around us are made from atoms. And then the atom, they found out that it even have smaller parts. They are made of neutrons and electrons. And then in the last 2 decades, a lot of effort and a lot of science and technology came along. And now they know that even electrons and even neutrons are made up of smaller and smaller parts, quantas and strings. And this is how the evolution of science, of physics, of car manufacturing, of computer science, of space exploration, electric cars have started by adopting this simple yet not very easy to implement kind of thinking, and which is called the first principle thinking. And now, sorry for taking that long, I'm gonna go back to healthcare. Next slide, please. So what is true about healthcare? Doctors deliver care. Nurses contribute in the delivery of care. Diagnosis is done using radiological and laboratory equipment operated by highly qualified professionals. Treatment is provided as per the latest pharmaceutical products. Are these the truths? Pharmaceutical companies conduct research for long years and present drugs after all trials of safety and efficacy are done. Third-party payers provide healthcare payments between patients and providers. These are given in modern healthcare. But I want you to reread the slide, but now without reading the red words. I'm going to read the slide again, but without the red words. Deliver care. So that's what's important, and that's the truth. The truth is healing. The truth is that we get sick, that these people get sick. We as a human race, and even as animal race, we can't be well all the time. And we need healers. We need people who take the sickness and find out what it is and deliver the right care. So the most important truth about healthcare, the problem we're trying to solve is not the roles, it's delivering the care. It's the sickness. Maybe prevent it, maybe figure out what is it and try to solve it right away. contribute in the delivery of care, the second bullet point, contribute in the delivery of care. Who contributes, how to contribute, and why to contribute. The different roles that should be involved, the team that should be structured around the main issue, which is delivering care, about diagnosing what's wrong. And here's the third point. Diagnosis is done using equipment operated by highly qualified professionals. And here, my point here in the third, in diagnosis, that diagnosis should be pushed by the basic truth, which is delivery of care. The people, the team who's working to diagnose, they should be pushing the equipment and the technology to come their way according to their priorities. Same goes for pharmaceutical companies, which is the fourth point. Treatment is provided as per the latest products. Treatment should be provided based on the recommendations of those who treat, of those who think that the priority and the most frequent sickness or most complex sickness is such and such, and they have to push the pharmaceutical companies or whoever is designing these drugs and deciding on what drug to research and to bring it into the market, to research these drugs and put them out there for the treaters and the people who are responsible for the treatments to use. And I'll go to the last bullet point, and it's provide healthcare payments between patient and providers. Third-party payers now are just a given in our healthcare system in every country, that we don't even think twice about them not existing. And here I want to go back to the saying by Henry Ford. It's on I think the 6th slide. Henry Ford's quote that I mentioned before says, "As we cut out useless parts and simplify necessary ones, we also cut down the cost of making." Thank you. I'll say it again. As we cut out the useless parts, we're removing everything that was useless, that's not value-based, and that is so the core of modern healthcare now, the value-based healthcare, cutting out all the useless parts that of not that being patient-centered and only contributing to the things that matter to the patient, cutting out the useless parts and simplifying the necessary ones, we also cut down the cost of making. Going back to the third-party payers, and here, the gift, the present, the reward that we get by adopting first principle thinking is cutting the cost, is removing the bureaucracies, is not needing other parties and other layers and other stakeholders to organize different features of this healthcare. And I'm not saying that we will not need them, but they will be part of the system. They will be under the truth, the real truth of healthcare, which is to heal, to prevent sickness, and to make people, to diagnose better, and to make people, to treat people even better. And that's how all the stakeholders right now involved in the healthcare system will be integrated in this team who diagnoses and who treats and who pushes the technology to be so he can diagnose better, treat better, and heal. And more truths about healthcare system that are common in modern, next slide, please, that are common in healthcare right now, is that the level of automation and becoming more paperless can help hospitals become more modern and cost-effective. Proper documentation of care leads to less medical errors and better communication between different providers of care to a patient. Access to care is restricted due to the high expenses of healthcare and unavailability of specialized care in remote places. I'm just reading them out loud because these are truths and these are important in the modern healthcare. But automation and paperless and documentation and communication and access, these are all byproducts and bandages to a bleeding healthcare system. And we have heard, next slide, that healthcare, please, Healthcare systems are complex systems, and that healthcare is in need of this desperate need of a disruption, of innovation, of a new technology that will help it go out of its mold. But in truth, it's built in a bureaucratic way that's keeping it that way. And right now, all of these things that were coming up, and they're really improving the healthcare, but it's like just bandages on a very bleeding and sick discipline, which is healthcare itself. Please, the last slide. And the system is suffering right now from high expenses, from medical errors, and malpractice to those honest physicians who are trying to treat those complex cases and they get hit by malpractices. It's like telling them to stop. And access to the care, either because of the expenses or because of the remote areas that do not have specialized centers near them, the inequity of care, the burnout of physicians, the burnout of nurses, the burnout of all those healthcare workers associated with the current healthcare systems. And the only way, in my opinion, is to adopt a different way of thinking of how we used to do things in healthcare, to use basic components, go back to the roots, go back to the truth, build up again, make a cohesive team, think about a team that shares an equal level of power between them, that have proper coordination, that have proper communication, that have a well-developed authority matrix, that all team members are empowered, and they all share the responsibility for care and the outcomes. To me, the solution or the improvement of the healthcare can happen by adopting first principle thinking. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that, Dr. Malak. That was a really good presentation. I like how you started off with the old-fashioned technology that was so big and so wonderful at the time, and then all of a sudden they narrowed it down and made it smarter, made it stronger, made it better, and by doing that, it was more efficient. First principle thinking. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Carl. Thank you for this opportunity.
Has anyone else got any questions? Chat box. Don't forget to use the chat box, guys, if you need to. Okay, well, if there is any other questions, just put them in the chat box and hopefully they'll get answered later. Thank you again, Dr. Malak.
Thank you.
Pleasure to meet you.
My pleasure as well.